version of the prayer for those held in captivity is something that appeared in different versions in many, many Jewish congregations shortly after the October 7th massacres. And I was just very struck with it. The version we have here is from the congregation B'nai Sharon in New York City, where I spend a lot of live stream time. And so I'm just going to read it to you in English. So notice, it is a prayer. And B'nai Sharon is one of those congregations that actually does a lot of chanting in Hebrew and serious practice, and also is very progressive politically. So that you'll notice the brothers and sisters, you'll notice of the ancestors, the fathers and the mothers. And so this again, the prayer for those held in captivity.
May the Holy One, who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless, protect, and guard our missing brothers and sisters who are in distress and captivity. May the Holy Compassionate One bring them out of darkness and the shadow of death. May God break their bonds, deliver them from their distress, and bring them swiftly back to their family's embrace. May there be fulfilled in them the verse, "Those redeemed by God will return. They will enter Zion with singing, and everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away." And let us say, Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. You promise to use your generous donations wisely and well. So appreciate the hush after that music. Yes. Our reading is a poem called Pause, and it was written by Zelda. Who was Zelda? Zelda was an Israeli poet. She died in 1984, so this poem is not from the present moment, but totally relevant to the present moment. She grew up in a very traditional household, traditional Jewish household. She married, and her last name, her married name is Mishkovsky, but she was known as Zelda all throughout Israel. She was like flagrantly popular, and her books were all over. I was trying to think of a poet in America who might have had that kind of, I don't know, prominence. And actually Robert Frost came to me as a poet. Like we have people, you know, poets I've seen like Amanda Gorman at the presidential nominations, but this one was very beloved. She ended up, her husband died, they had no children. She moved out of the Orthodox enclave more to a neighborhood where more outsiders came in, and people would visit her, and young women ended up coming, living with her. She ended up caring for her. They ended up caring, she ended up caring for them. They ended up caring for her. And it was just an interesting story. So here's the poem, Pause. It begins with an epigraph. For the terrorist who saved an Israeli prisoner from the hands of other terrorists who wanted to torture him. Pause. A gesture of the hand wipes out the fantasies of torture. A gesture by one of the wolves of suicide, an eager youth who suddenly set hate aside because his soul revealed to him. Hatred lies. Hatred lies. Hatred lies. And the force of his imaginings burst upon a new path with the sounds of childhood and of miracles. When the primordial good awoke in him, he saved the prisoner. When a river flowed from his inner Eden, he gave him water to revive him in the desert. Slowly the monster of vengeance retreated, and fresh worlds of hope and the joy of wells rich with water were revealed. Oh, both of them knew this was not the whole truth. This was a pause on a green island, beyond all nations, beyond all origins. On this island, in one of the caves, peace opened its eyes.
Good morning. I feel like a home away from home here with all of you. I've been here so much this past week. I grapple with my own biases, which hinder and blind me. When I start to react out of fear or defensiveness, reflexively, impulsively, I tend to tense up. That's my cue to remember to take a breath and follow the lead of my Sangha teacher, Joanne Friday, of blessed memory, who said to us many times, check again. Is it really true? Is your understanding of this particular situation accurate? I'm always looking for reminders like that. Seamus Heaney, one of my favorite writers, winner of the 1995 Nobel Prize in Literature, gave this aspirational advice. We must walk on air against our better judgment. What might that mean? We must walk on air against our better judgment. Synchronistically, as I was drafting this, a friend sent me New Year's greetings with the astrological news that apparently we have shifted from an age of earth into an age of air for the first time in 800 years. That sounds big, but what does it mean? Well, if you give credence to this stuff, the air element in astrology represents the mind, communication, thinking. In the ancient Indian Ayurvedic healing tradition, the air element is directly linked to Anahata, the heart center. The heart is often thought of as a place where the soul abides, where our life energy is held, like the spirit, or ruach in Hebrew, the wind or breath that animates all of life. Putting it together, the potential for air to connect mind and heart, maybe via breath. The breath needed for action, including the action of speech. Taking a breath in order to speak on the exhale. Deep breaths to gain the strength and equanimity to do difficult things, like living. At the peak of each breath is that pause between the inhale and the exhale. What a gift. It's automatic. All of which helps me to wake from any nightmare, a word that appears in the title of this sermon and in the title of my new play, which I performed here yesterday, and you so kindly acknowledged, everybody. More on that in a minute. When that sort of inner collaboration happens between mind, heart, breath, body, and speech, we should praise ourselves like we praise small children and good dogs. But what about joining this achievement of the self to others, to the community? How do we maintain unity with each other to accomplish the humanitarian project, seeking the truth, as Joanne Friday encouraged, to create peace, freedom, justice, even when people disagree? I do my theater work, even the writing part, in collaboration with others, which doesn't always work out so perfectly as my recent collaboration did with Nancy and Barbara and with Adria, who invited me to speak with you today. People are variable in their abilities to work together peaceably, but scratch the surface, dare to be vulnerable, and oftentimes you get shown the soft side of even the fiercest perceived foe. I tend to give the benefit of the doubt, and when I'm disappointed, it's sometimes hard to remember that I should probably look inward to the buttons pressed in me by my perceptions of others. It's biases again. It's the same lesson I've been trying to learn my entire adult life. My learning curve is not linear. It's more like a spiral, halfway back to go forward and up. My theater work includes one of my favorite roles, Golda Meir, a founder of Israel, its prime minister from 1969 to 74. One of the reasons I cherish playing her is because she's so torn in William Gibson's brilliant play, Golda's Balcony. She grapples. She had a moral choice to make, the myth goes, to press the nuclear button that might have destroyed the world to save Israel during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, or not. She also had to choose in her personal life between work, which was politics, and family. She's a character in my newest version of Picking Up Stones, An American Jew Wakes to a Nightmare, a solo play I wrote so that I could grapple mentally and emotionally with the tangled, intractable moral knot that is Israel-Palestine. Today, as I write this, as I wrote it, Israel was for the first time in its history charged with genocide by the International Court of Justice. Is the war that began with the Hamas attack on October 7th, which itself might be called genocidal, is that war which Israel is pursuing against Hamas in Gaza, is it a just war? Or is it an intentional act of genocide against the Palestinian people? This world court proceeding will be interesting and difficult to watch for Jews in Israel and for Jews around the world. I am an American Jew, but I also have cousins in Israel, so my feelings are further complicated. Nonetheless, regarding the Israel-Palestine conflict and my play about it, I try to hold in my mind, in my body, and with my breath, two opposing views, two people's versions of their eons-long ongoing tragedy. Never more so than since October 7th, when I began to rewrite my play because of that shocking, horror-filled event. How could we know at that moment that a civilizational crisis was beginning? 2 months later, I gasped when my union rep, I'm a teacher in a public school, showed me a social media post about me. An elected official in my school committee, in my school district, had attacked me personally by calling me by name and saying I should be checked on in the McCarthy way. Checked on, like maybe I'm a commie, because in her mind, she couldn't put two truths together. She thought I was active as a defender of Israel, having played Golda Meir, which I am, though I happen to be very critical of Netanyahu's far-right government, and because I'm also known for supporting progressive social and racial justice causes. She thought, I guess, because she associates Hamas with the political left, that I must also be for Hamas, which I most emphatically am not. Right? It is, of course, a terrorist organization that calls for the slaughter of Jews and the destruction of Israel. She called me a comrade who supports comrades, and that I must be splitting in two. Oy. It would be ridiculous and farcical, something out of a Saturday Night Live skit, if it weren't very real and troubling, nuanced situation. This official's denouncement of me resulted in letters to the Westerly Sun and a public meeting to hear statements from each of her peers and from the public, and then to have a vote by her peers to censure her or not. People spoke on both sides, but mostly, thankfully, the community spoke up for me, which was moving for me to hear. They eloquently supported the idea that an oath is an oath. A public servant promises to abide by the rules of ethical standards and a code of conduct. In this case, two rules were broken. Don't speak disparagingly about an employee in public, and always aim to promote and maintain harmonious relations with the community. It all ended on the small scale of my hometown pretty well for democracy and for the purpose of civil discourse. There was disagreement, but not discord in that room, and unity by the end of the night, because these elected officials must continue to work together. It was a big moment in my life, in all the lives of those who witnessed or participated in it, I think, including a handful of young people. I wish there had been more there. Anyway, it was too juicy, so of course I had to include a bit of it in my play. My case pales to other individuals we know of who have been wrongly attacked, maligned, and threatened, their families threatened. And in terms of a ruling body who required themselves to take a vote, to examine the evidence in a logical, unbiased way, I know the comparison is huge, but I am thinking of what's going on in The Hague. Boundaries must be drawn, consequences delivered and enforced against immoral behavior. In my case, a moral line was drawn against this person who posted so disparagingly about me. She crossed it, and she was sanctioned for it. Will the process at The Hague be as fair and unbiased? I was walking on air after my own experience with public moral accountability. This vote to censure an elected official had never happened in the history of that school committee. Just 24 hours before the public meeting, I'd been undecided about whether or not to speak on my own behalf or to have a trusted colleague read my words. I was nervous. I found out later my colleague had been holding her breath for me to change my mind and do what I finally did. Her breath brings me back to my original theme of air. How do you walk on air against your better judgment? Maybe it's a leap of faith based on solid moral footing. Seamus Heaney describes this moment right before you decide to walk on air as like a moment of exposure to interstellar cold, a reminder of the scary element, both inner and outer, in which human beings must envisage and conduct their lives. I felt like that in the days leading up to the public meeting, and while sitting in that standing room only space, full of emotion, trying to inconspicuously take deep breaths and feel everything that was happening in that space of an hour and a half. The flawless way the chair of the committee allowed everyone who wanted to speak, but gently, firmly reined in those who were a bit too long or inappropriate. The way people spoke from their heart and mind seemed absolutely sincere and committed, no matter where they stood on the question of censure. That story had a good ending. Back to Seamus Heaney, who tells a harrowing story about one of the most harrowing moments in the whole history of the harrowing of the heart in Northern Ireland. When a minibus full of workers being driven home one January evening in 1976 was held up by armed and masked men, and the occupants of the van ordered at gunpoint to line up at the side of the road. Then one of the masked executioners said to them, "Any Catholics among you? Step out here." As it happened, this particular group, with one exception, were all Protestants. The presumption must have been that the masked men were Protestant paramilitaries about to carry out a tit-for-tat sectarian killing of Catholics. It was a terrible moment for the one odd man out, caught between dread and witness, but he did make a motion to step forward. Then the story goes, in that split second of decision and in the relative cover of the winter evening darkness, he felt the hand of the Protestant worker next to him take his hand and squeeze it in a signal that said, "No, don't move, will not betray you. Nobody need know what faith or party you belong to." All in vain, however, for the man stepped out of line, but instead of finding a gun at his temple, he was thrown backward and away as the gunman opened fire on those remaining in the line. For these were not Protestant terrorists, but members, presumably, of the other Catholic side. One can imagine another scene of horror at the daily prisoner count by Nazi guards, say in the barrack yards of Auschwitz, when if one Jew managed to escape, others closed ranks to hide the hole in the line. But when that person was found, inevitably the 100 or so around his place were also shot. The Irish-English troubles lasted about 30 years. South African apartheid lasted almost 50 years. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict has lasted 75 years of modern history. Seamus Heaney says, "The birth of the future we desire is surely in the contraction which that terrified Catholic felt on the roadside when another hand gripped his hand, not in the gunfire that followed, so absolute and so desolate." Every year, when it comes time for me to teach my seniors about the various ways evil takes hold in the world, war crimes, genocide, and ultimately the Holocaust, I ask this moral question of my students. Would you be willing to commit the good lie if the fascists came to your door, demanding to know if you were hiding, well, fill in the blank, someone vulnerable to persecution? Will you grasp the hand of your fellow human in solidarity and reassurance that life, a just life, a peaceful, coexisting life is what matters? It's what we all want, except maybe Hamas. Still, sometimes one side doesn't need to win so absolutely. At the end of that public meeting, I went over to my adversary, the one who'd been censured. I shook her hand and I said, "I understand your confusion." She said, "Maybe I shouldn't have said your name in the post." Right. We stand up for truth, and justice when it's threatened. Step out of line for it. Speak, even if your voice trembles. Or, as Joanne Friday used to say, we can write love letters to our representatives, demanding it. Finally, to quote from another favorite source who experienced the horrors of the Holocaust and found meaning in the depths of those horrors, Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I invite us all to take a deep breath. There's work to be done, peace to be found, alone and together.